start the school board trustee meeting for July 9th. I'm call this meeting to order. We'll go ahead and adopt the agenda as submitted for possible action. Is there any motion?
So moved.
Second.
Laurel motion, second with Mike. Any public comment? Seeing none. All those approve?
Aye.
All those nay. Going on to number 2, adjournment to closed session per NRS 288.220, parentheses 4, to discuss labor relations with the district's management representatives for discussion only. We'll now close session. Carson City School Board meeting reconvened into public session. And moving on to number 4, would you please help us with the flag salute with Laurel, please? Well, we have a state flag.
We'll go, yeah, there's
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Moving on to number 5, Superintendent's Report for information only. Mr. Stokes.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. Earlier last month, I received a very nice letter from the Association of School Business Officials International. And it's my privilege to let you know that our own Andrew Fueling recently achieved the Certified Administrator of School Finance and Operations certification by the Association for School Business Officials International. The SFO certification is granted to highly qualified individuals who fulfill multiple requirements, including providing eligibility through work experience and education, passing a comprehensive 2-part exam that tests competency in accounting and school business management topics, and adhering to the ASBO International Certification Code of Conduct. SFO certification demonstrates a commitment to high standards and ethical practice in school business management. School business officials who earn this credential commit to ongoing professional development, renew the certification each year, and undergo recertification every 3 years. So thank you, AJ. We're privileged to have someone of his caliber, his state notoriety after this last legislative session, and certainly his competence. And just wanted to say congratulations, AJ, and let you folks know that this is a recognition that he received and that we received as a school district as well. So that's really all I had tonight.
So just receiving that, one thing it doesn't mean is that you're good at scheduling. So I scheduled that back in the beginning of January, thinking, well, the session's going to be here, but I'll schedule it for the first weekend in June. So after a complete meltdown over 4 months at the legislative session, the very next weekend I had to go take this 4-hour set of tests. And so anyway.
Maybe you did better because you didn't have to stress out about it because you were already dead brained, you know?
Probably.
So, and there's probably a big section on tables and charts. Yes. Well, we are pretty proud. I don't think in the time that I've been on the school board that we've had a financial officer receive that certification. So, AJ, you should be very proud.
Madam President, that's all I have, so thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to board reports, number 6. Laurel? Richard? Lupe? Joe? Nothing tonight. Don? Mike? Ooh, we're doing good tonight. Anything about the NSAB or NASB? Laurel?
I think I reported last meeting that the Board of Directors training and retreat that was planned for August has been canceled. So the next one will be in September. So we'll have, or October. I'm not sure.
September, last weekend in September.
Okay, so almost October.
Yeah.
So
It's always on my birthday. We have a party. Anyway, moving on to number 7, association reports. Loretta, having a good summer? Okay. Moving on to 8, public comment. Comments may be made by members of the public on any matters within the authority of this board. Please note that the public comment will be taken on items marked for possible action before action is taken on such items, and members of the public are encouraged to comment on such items at that time that are being considered. Although members of the board may respond to questions and discuss issues raised during public comment, no action may be taken on such matters until the matter is placed on an agenda for action at a meeting of the board. In making public comment, speakers are asked to come to the table, sign in, speak at the microphone, and identify themselves for the record. Speakers are asked to limit their comments to no more than 3 minutes and do not simply repeat comments made by others. Is there anyone here for public comment? Thank you. Seeing none, moving on to number 9. Discussion and possible action on a resolution designated as the 2019 refunding bond resolution declaring the necessity of incurring a bonded indebtedness on behalf of the Carson City School District for the purposes of refunding certain outstanding bonds of the district, authorizing the issuance of the Carson City School District Nevada General Obligation Limited Tax Refunding Bond Series 2019A in the aggregate, thank you, principal amounts not to exceed $3 million, $13 million, provided the form of bonds for their payment and providing the effective date for possible action. Mr. Fueling and Mr. Henry, welcome.
Thank you, President Wilkie, trustees. Andrew Feeling for the record. So at the last meeting of the Board of Trustees, Marty Johnson, the district's bond advisor, was here to discuss the opportunity to do a refunding of current outstanding bonds to save the district approximately $350,000, money that can be used to maximize future bonding capacity when we decide to go out for new construction type bonds. The presentation he gave, everything in the resolution with you this evening is represented there in those words for your consideration. Passing the resolution just authorizes myself and Mr. Stokes to carry out and execute the sale of the refunding bond. Mr. Henry, who is sitting next to me, may have some more to say about that. Mr. Henry is our bond legal counsel from Sherman and Howard. He is also a Carson High graduate.
Yay.
For the record, Ryan Henry from Sherman and Howard. As AJ said, what this resolution does is authorizes the issuance of this refunding bond, and the plan right now would be to move forward and sell the refinancing bonds in a couple weeks and then actually close and pay off the refunded bond on August 13th. One thing I just wanted to mention in the resolution, it talks about the maximum principal amount being $13 million. We got an updated numbers run from Marty Johnson today, and he actually expects us to come in quite a bit below that because of premium on the bonds. And Marty's expectation is that the bond would actually be issued in the amount of $10,985,000. And as AJ mentioned, this is a refunding bond, so it's a refinancing just like you'd refinance your house for interest rate savings, and we're not extending the maturity date on the refunded bond. The maturity date's staying the same. This is just for savings. So if anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Joe?
No, I was just going to say, I think Marty did a really good job last meeting, kind of going over all this and spelling it all out. So again, I appreciate the work everybody's done. And, you know, there didn't seem to be really a downside to saving a little bit of money. So to me, it makes some sense. So with that, I'm happy to make a motion. I move that the Carson City School District Board of Trustees approve the 2019 refunding bond resolution as submitted, authorizing the superintendent to arrange for the sale of general obligation limited tax refunding bonds, Series 219A, in an amount not exceeding $13 million.
Motion by Joe, second by Mike. Any discussion by the board? Any public comment? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Bond passes. Ryan, thank you for being here for 5 minutes. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
It's always good to see another Carson High grad in the room. Moving on to number 10, discussion and proposed changes to CCSD Policy 526, Search and Seizure, first reading for discussion only. Mrs. Seer.
Good evening, Madam President and trustees, staff, member of the public. For the record, Ann Seer, Risk Manager. This evening, I have the pleasure of introducing a updating of Policy 526 pertaining to search and seizure. The policy has been updated just as a matter of routine updating. There hasn't been any incident that has given rise to need for this other than just a routine review of the policies. Previously, there was no regulation. There was just the policy statement. So in reviewing some of the guidance, written guidance from Department of Ed, various journals, became evident to us that we needed to provide a little more guidance. So just to read this into the record, Policy 526, Search and Seizure, the Carson City School District is committed to providing an orderly academic environment for learning that promotes the acquisition of knowledge and advances the free exchange of ideas. The preservation of this educational environment is an important objective for the district. Incidents which jeopardize the health, safety, and welfare of the school community may necessitate the search of students and their property, student use areas, student lockers, and automobiles. Such searches may necessitate the seizure of illegal, unauthorized drugs, alcohol, devices, or contraband discovered during the search. The board directs the superintendent to develop regulations setting forth the circumstances and procedures required to be followed in the search of students and their property, student use areas, student lockers, and student automobiles, and any resulting seizure of any evidence found. And there are a few NRS references there as well to note. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or make note of any suggestions you have.
Mike?
So, Ann, I just have a question. The line, the unauthorized drugs. So, in my mind, I'm wondering if that's strong enough. If we want to leave it that vague, do we want to say controlled substances? I mean, but unauthorized drugs could be, over the cough syrup or something that, you know what I mean, a kid brings. So, I mean, I kind of saw both sides. I saw in the regulation, you had controlled substances, and so I didn't know if we wanted to kind of match that. I just don't know if unauthorized drugs is strong enough, but I understood your intent.
Sure.
And then the only other thing I was thinking of, when you have this series of areas that could be searched, it's a series, but then before the and, I would suggest a comma, so and automobiles. So comma and automobiles.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Joe?
In the second proposed paragraph where it says, second line, in the search of students and their property, I was wondering if we should say on district property. I mean, I'm assuming if a student's on campus or the car is parked on a campus or on, district-owned property, that's when we would check it as opposed to leaving it.
What if they're at a hotel because they're on an extra?
Well, that's what that's okay. And that's what I was wondering is, so it's better to keep it vague?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the regulation goes into a little more detail on that too.
Yeah.
It does.
Okay. All right. Then that's fine with me.
Okay.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
Any other corrections or comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to number 11, discussion on newly proposed CCSD Regulation 526, search and seizure for discussion only. Mrs. Sears.
Thank you. So this is the regulation that supports the policy that we just read into the record. Due to the length of the regulation at almost 6 pages, I'm not going to read the entire thing into the record. Before I make note of a few highlights, I would like to note a correction under the first paragraph titled Purpose. The second sentence begins incidents which jeopardize the health, safety, and welfare of the school community. We can strike that. That's an incomplete sentence. The sentence should begin with the word prudence dictates. And then on page 4, under strip searches, at the end of that sentence, we have 2 periods. So we can make that correction as well.
Just while we're doing that, one other correction on page 4 under health, safety of students. 1, 2, 3, the third or the fourth line down after law enforcement. So the school official shall notify law enforcement, and there's a parenthesis, and then proceed with as much speed. So it should take off the ing because it should be notify law enforcement and then proceed with as much speed and dispatch.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So with that, I would just note that the regulation covers the purpose of the regulation, the scope, which Trustee Casiopo on the previous agenda item commented on, that the regulation applies to all students of the district, whether on school property, school buses or vehicles, at school bus stops, and at academic and non-academic events. This regulation also applies to situations in which students are under the jurisdiction of the school district, including students participating in extracurricular activities and athletics, duly enrolled students, and students taking online courses. Okay. There are a few key definitions there. Who is an appropriate school official? This is a broad definition which does apply to school officials who may be serving as chaperones, supervisors, coaches, may be the only school official present at an extracurricular athletic event, electronic device, and a definition of reasonable suspicion. And in addition, as used in this regulation, reasonable suspicion for a search means grounds sufficient to cause an adult of normal intellect to believe that the search of a particular person, place, or thing will lead to the discovery of evidence that the student, A, has violated or is violating a rule or behavioral norm provided in school policy, B, has violated or is violating a particular law, and C, possesses an item or substance which presents an immediate danger of physical harm or illness to student, staff, or school and/or district property. Okay? Beyond the definitions, we have some guidance on conducting. Yes?
So when you're looking at that section with the definitions, and I guess this is a question for Mr. Stokes, my concern is this is an area that we could have a huge liability with. And so school administrators have training in this. When you're looking at the band is on a trip somewhere, the band director might not have real training on how to do searches of students. And so I'm wondering about training of individuals who would be deemed the appropriate staff member in a case where they're away from a school site.
Thank you, Mr. Walker, for the question. And I've actually received telephone calls as an administrator when we've had school events happen off-site. And under those conditions, I was happy to provide information or detail to the chaperones. That's something we'd have to talk about in terms of training, because truly not every teacher is engaged in those kinds of activities. And so, we might have to give that some consideration. I don't have an exact answer for you.
And maybe it could even be kind of in coaches or whatever training, you know what I mean? Maybe just those individuals who take on those extra responsibilities for sports teams or extracurricular activities. I would just hate to get in a situation where we have an overzealous coach or, staff member who's just willy-nilly searching people and we end up with, uproar.
Yeah.
And I just have a question about that. Under C with the possesses an item or substance which presents an immediate danger, I'm just wondering about the immediate danger. If it's something that's in a backpack, it's questionable whether or not it's immediate, but it's probably something that is dangerous that they shouldn't be in possession of anyway if they become aware of it. Do we maybe want to remove the qualifying of it immediate, if they're possessing something that's dangerous, does it have to be immediate, or could it just be the fact that there's a dangerous item in there?
That's a really good question. I think we should probably research that a bit further and maybe consider whether or not we need to keep that language in there.
Think about that, Laurel. I mean, there's a lot of things that could be a dangerous item. You know what I'm saying? And so, I mean, I'm wondering, that might be a definition of exactly what that means. I'm just saying, when something's happening and you have a bunch of kids that you're responsible for, you don't want somebody to have to sit and try to determine what is a dangerous material, or a dangerous item, yeah.
Well, and my thought is, if you have a report that someone has a knife in there, it's not drawn, is it an immediate danger? Well, it's not an immediate danger because it's folded, but they still shouldn't have a knife. And so that would be where I would, or a gun, but maybe it's not loaded. It wasn't an immediate danger, but you still needed to search it.
I think the knife or the gun would be a violation of law.
Yeah.
So, but I agree with Ann that we.
Cough syrup, if it's in copious amounts, I don't know, maybe.
I'm not certain.
Oh, or pepper spray. They're not using it, but I don't know.
Yeah. I'm not entirely certain, but I am suspecting that the differentiation between A, B, and C may have something to do with reasonable suspicion and exigent circumstances, where we can't really articulate a reasonable suspicion, but we suspect there is something of immediacy which provides exigent circumstances to conduct the search. But we will look into that and confirm that that's maybe the way that's worded the way it is, and if it needs to be worded more clearly, then we can do that.
And when I look at these things, I'm not trying to be nitpicky, but I'm looking as a school administrator. So I have a situation going on that I need to solve right now.
Right.
You want these policies and regulations to be really easy to understand, and an administrator could go right to them and say, this is what this means.
Yeah.
Without having to get Mr. Stokes on the phone, because who knows where he is, or Tasha. I mean, it's just one of those things that we want these to be a tool for our educators to use and
Right.
really efficiently do their jobs.
I will say I was pleased. I reviewed this draft language with a few administrators who do perform searches periodically, and they didn't really have anything to add or subtract from this. They all felt like this language pretty well described their current practice. So to just capture that and provide that to new administrators or less experienced, I think is a good thing to do. Okay?
I have a question on the last page, on page 6. And I know we've discussed this in years past, and I believe we've had some incidences with parents. It says school officials have no obligation to contact parents before detaining and questioning. And I just want to be clear, I have no issue with that. I don't think the process should be held up until the parents, but what's our stance on that? I mean, I'd like to think as a district, if we have an issue, there would at least be a follow-up call to the parents so that the parents aren't just getting the student's interpretation of it, and then the district and the school getting phone calls going, why'd you do this
Right.
to my kid?
Trustee Cassiopo, one of the conditions for all teachers is an understanding of a Latin term called in loco parentis, which means when you drop that student off at the school doors, the adults that are there in charge of the students are acting in lieu of not having the parent right there. And so there is some flexibility that we have as a result of that, but I agree with you. It makes good sense for us to keep our parents informed about what's going on, and I know that our folks in general will try to reach out. I also know that they can't spend all day trying to locate someone that they're not able to find, but they do try to reach out as they can. And that's something that we talk about regularly just as school employees, that concept of customer service and trying to make sure that we're keeping people informed. But it's always good for us to remind our folks to make every effort to reach out to our parents when there's an issue involving their child at school.
Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, I agree, and I'm familiar with that whole idea and the term. I just would agree with that it's, if I discipline my kids, I typically tell my wife. It's just, we're partners in this whole thing, and I think it makes sense to, hey, by the way, because otherwise, the kid, gee, Mr. Cassiopo is just a horrible guy and he did this to me. And then, our administrators are caught explaining this to parents. And I just like to keep our administrators within a reasonable, with reasonable consideration, let the parents know. And yeah, I don't want them to spend all day trying to contact somebody, but at least make an effort and have a record of it that, hey, I tried to reach out to the parents, this afternoon and the following morning with no success.
So I guess my thought is doing a search of a child it's pretty extreme. It's not something that routinely happens. Right. You know what I mean? You're actually touching kids, patting them down, asking them to remove their shoes, looking in their bags. I think anytime a search of a student takes place, we have an obligation to notify the parents. I mean, I don't think it's we should. I think if that was your child, you would expect to get a call from the school. You wouldn't want your child to come home. And I just think that I'm not saying you don't search until you talk to the parents. What I'm saying is if we search a child, I think at the very least, the school administrator should call that parent and say, this is what happened. Here's the information we received. We found X, Y, and Z, or we didn't find anything. But we need to have that communication with parents, I believe.
So just a question. So if the administrator is not able to get a hold of the parent, where do they record that information? Where do they record that they did attempt to get a hold of the parent? Is it an Infinite Campus or?
They could do it in Infinite Campus. I mean, they could have, and this is typically stuff that's happening at secondary schools, even though it sometimes happens at elementary schools, but there's discipline files. But I mean, documentation of when you contacted, you know what I mean? If a parent doesn't get back to you, they don't get back to you. But I mean, we should at least be doing our work and saying, hey, you need to know this happened.
So I think the distinction here in the regulation is that school officials have no legal obligation to notify parents. But certainly that is our practice. And I think we need to leave a little bit of wiggle room here and given some consideration to those searches that may involve our SROs and law enforcement, and note that they may be making that notification. So sometimes we have to work in partnership with law enforcement, and they may request that they make that notification. So we'll massage that language a little bit just to make that intent clear.
I think we need to keep it clear too that they don't have to contact parents before detaining and questioning. You can detain them and question them at some point, parental notification, but you're not going to see something happening and then, I got to call the folks first. That we need to be able to give them the ability to act.
I agree. It's more of a reasonable effort after the fact.
Yeah. Okay, so the next section on page 2 just addresses school property, the lockers, desks, storage areas that are provided for student use, that we would make notification to students at the beginning of the school year that these items are routinely checked and may be open to search, using dogs in searching school property, student person and possessions, personal search of a student and student consent to the search, strip searches, how we document the search, the search procedures themselves, health and safety of students, what to do with any items found, procedures for vehicles, use of breath alcohol testing instruments, and search of student electronic devices. So those are the key elements of a search and seizure regulation, just guided by current best practice recommendations. We referenced materials and tried to cover all of the key elements that a policy and regulation should cover. So if you have any further comments, suggestions, I'm happy to take those.
Richard?
Yes, thank you for the work on this, but on the use of the breath alcohol testing
Yes.
instruments, who conducts the test? It's not everybody can give one. The equipment has to be recalibrated on a regular basis.
Right.
Not everybody's trained to do them. And it doesn't really make it clear in here if you're calling law enforcement to have them submit or to conduct the test. I think that'd be the appropriate thing, to have law enforcement do it, because the teachers are not trained, administrators are not trained, as far as I know, to conduct these tests. It's not something you can just pick up an instrument and tell the kid to blow into it. You got to know how to use it.
So my understanding, and Mrs. Fuson may be able to add additional information here, but the devices that we use are not of law enforcement grade, but they do test for the presence of alcohol, and if they are tested positive, then we do call law enforcement in. And these are typically done on reasonable suspicion, observation of certain behaviors at like dances.
Are those recalibrated on a regular basis? Because they have to be recalibrated.
So what Mrs. Tasha Fuson, for the record, what Mrs. Sear said is correct. So we use those in conjunction or with our SROs. So, and it typically is at a dance, for instance, and we will do random breathalyzing. And then if a student blows and it comes out positive, then we actually have our SROs come in and they actually do the actual testing of it. So it's just kind of used as a litmus test or a screen or a gauge and then the actual test is done by the school resource officers. So that's how that kind of works. But so it is administered typically by an administrator. Sometimes if we don't have the SROs available, if the SROs are there at the dance, then they will actually do it for the school.
Okay, you may want to just check on the recalibration of those, because in my career, we use them a lot, and there's, they have to be recalibrated.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the other thing on section B of that, if a student tests positive for the presence of blood, alcohol, or dangerous unprescribed drugs, how are you, I guess, determining that they're under the influence of an unprescribed drug? Because usually you have to have a drug recognition expert who's trained to make that determination.
That's typically the SROs as well. If we believe a student to be under the influence, we've actually called parents. For instance, it's happened where we've called parents to a dance and recommended to them and said, we need you to come pick up your students. We have belief that your child, but if we can't prove it, there's typically not disciplinary action taken. It's just the parents informed, we have a concern, please come pick up your child. We make a recommendation that they assess the student that way. We don't, at the site levels, administer drug tests to students. Sometimes our probation officers and our parole officers will come in and test students, but other than through athletics testing, by the way, that's a separate issue than this one.
Yeah.
But that's typically how that's done. So we've had situations where we've believed students to be under the influence or come to school high, so then we bring them to the clinic, and the nurse will do basically a screening as well, and then it's always the fact that the parents are called and asked to come in and address it with the student unless the student is in, if we're worried about the student's safety in terms of health, how they're responding, having bad or adverse reactions to what we think that they've taken. In that case, often they'll get transported. Luckily, it doesn't happen a lot, but that's usually done by the health or the nurse on the site, that kind of a screening. So it depends on the situation.
I guess it would probably clarify it. as an administrator, they're not necessarily saying, I think you took drugs that you're not prescribed. I think it's kind of like, as an employer, you might say an employee appears to be unfit for duty. So, I mean, they appear to be unfit to participate in the school event or something, and so then they go to the next step is what I'd say. I don't
Right.
think that there's necessarily a, we think you took drugs type
Correct.
discussion usually.
Trustee Walker, and that's why normally we'll
That's what the
involve.
policy says, or the regulation says.
Yeah, so trustee Varner, I would suggest that given the heading of this paragraph reads use of breath alcohol testing instruments, that under item B, we strike or dangerous unprescribed drug. Because the regulation, the paragraph pertains specifically to the use of blood alcohol testing devices. Does that make it more clear?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think just to speak to what you stated, Trustee Walker, and that is correct. It's usually we're observing the behavior of the student. And when we either ask for support of the school nurse, healthcare provider, and/or school resource officers, and/or contact the parent, it's to say that it's an observation of the behavior being of concern, and then addressing that depending on what it is.
And I think you are addressing another regulation this evening that deals specifically with drug and alcohol use and how we deal with those types of observations and respond to those. So this regulation deals specifically with search and seizure, so we'll stick with that. And then, were there any questions about student electronic devices and searching those mobile
I have
devices?
one on that also, if I could. And maybe I'm just reading this wrong, but on the last sentence of that first paragraph, reads how many, let's see. So the scope will be limited only to those parts of the contents where the evidence, that didn't really quite read right to me, so maybe I'm just reading it wrong.
Oh, maybe there's other parts.
I'm sorry, can you lead me to where you are?
Yes, it's under the student electronic devices, that first paragraph.
Okay,
Actually, the next to the last sentence, on the end of that sentence, it says, only to those parts of the contents.
only to those parts.
Does that read right, or is that just
Yep.
me?
It sounds
Of
like
the
a
parts
repeat
should be stricken
to those
to those parts of the contents where the evidence being sought.
Just
Yeah.
a,
Yep, thank you.
And then on the third paragraph down, when you're talking about preserving the evidence, it says, generally, evidence should be preserved in some manner so that it may be presented as evidence during a subsequent disciplinary hearing. Do you think that's too broad, or it should be, I guess coming from my background, it has to be in a secure location, locked and under the sole custody, care, and control of one person? And we probably don't need to go that far, but maybe it should be locked in some kind of secured manner. Instead of just saying in some manner, because I can see where somebody says, well, I did secure it, I put it in my desk drawer, or I put it on top of the cabinet over there. In my mind, it was secure.
We will work on that.
My question would be, if it's on an electronic device, typically, once you've done your investigation, unless it's something that requires us to hand it over to law enforcement, you would give that back to the parents. And so at that point, they would either need to capture images of whatever it was or have them forwarded on to their school email if it wasn't explicit photos of children. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I'm wondering,
Or have another
Yeah,
administrator
so, I
observe
mean,
it
it
and
might-
document what they observed.
yeah, so it might be just kind of a reworking of how it's phrased, because typically you're gonna give the parent back that device. Most parents are gonna demand it at some point.
and then any of the images are gonna disappear. And so either pictures of it or screenshots or something.
I would say depending on what's on the phone, whether or not the parent would receive it back until the disciplinary proceedings were completed. You know, if it's child porn, if it's sexting, you may not want to give it back until the disciplinary hearing's completed.
Yeah, I think with that type of evidence, it would be seized by law enforcement. Yeah.
And it even says that in there. Any other questions, comments? I just have one about the procedures then. So this is a new regulation.
Correct.
So if they're on a school bus, does that school bus driver have, if he has suspicions, can he search and seizure?
He may be a appropriate school official depending on the circumstances and the immediacy of the situation.
So do
If-
we have a
if-
way
if
to get
he's-
that information to them? And then to follow up on Mr. Walker's question, when we have a chaperone for events and they see something, do they know, how do we get this information? Do we have a handbook that we give people when they're chaperones or they're volunteers or they're, you know, even if they're teachers, do they
Right.
know what they're?
Yeah, I think you've raised some really good questions about how we inform all of the staff about this regulation. Previously, all we had was a policy statement that basically said, you know, we can look in desks and lockers, and it's a new day. We have mobile devices. We have all kinds of things that we're looking for. I mean, administrators are looking for vaping devices on almost a daily basis. So I think to
just
provide
think-
that information and training to all staff and let them know, you know, if you're not sure if you are that appropriate school official, to contact an administrator and find out who is, so that the person who's doing that search has been trained.
I guess, I mean, and I'm just really concerned that we don't want people just searching people. You know what I'm saying? We need
Right.
some real clear protocol about that. And so I think that, and it might be something that comes from Mr. Stokes at a principals meeting, which is then kind of rolled down. But I mean, you know, I mean, I would say it would be a very extreme situation. You would have a bus driver doing a search of a student or a chaperone doing a search of a student. I think it's just a huge liability. I mean, it makes me really nervous thinking about that even.
Right.
Just a thought, though, that I had with the appropriate school official, because when I first read that, I thought it was limiting it to really just the school principal, vice principal, and dean, and I was wondering if we shouldn't include our school resource officers in that as well. And so I'm wondering if we might want to look at that language and maybe broaden, which then goes to how broad do you make it, but who might be the appropriate school official, so that it's clear that it's a little more open than just those three individuals.
So SROs are actually provided with broad search capabilities. We don't necessarily want to define them as school officials. They are law enforcement officials. Yeah. Yes.
Open up a can of worms here. I've chaperoned numerous trips, mostly band, other trips as well. And it's just been policy that, I don't know, maybe not written policy, but this is just something the band director wants. As a chaperone, we check the bags before we leave. 100% of them. I don't know if that is covered by this policy. We check bags. I mean, I remember when I was in school, I did a lot of trips.
Sure.
People checked their bags. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you're aware of that. It's usually up to the director of, in this case, of the band, but I'm guessing in sports as well.
Yeah.
Now, the students are notified. The director tells them, you're gonna get a bag check.
Is that, just out of curiosity, is there any kind of information that goes to the parent? Usually you have to sign a permission to let your kid go.
As a chaperone, I get there before we leave, and with other chaperones, we go through. I'm not aware of,
But did you get notification as a parent of a band?
I knew it was gonna happen, so I guess, I'm not sure if I got it written information, but certainly verbally.
So we'll need
it's-
to look into that and
But
see
that's,
what
I mean, I
kind of
think that
notice
regularly
we're
happens. I'm
providing.
guessing other
Yeah.
groups do that as well. I mean, you may know more about that, but that's just something routine. Again, I went to high school many, many years ago, and they did it then, so.
It is quite routine. We do notify parents typically, and often we bring in drug dogs. For instance, if you're going to go on a long-term, trip with FBLA or skills, et cetera. I think this covers that. When it comes to training and notification, I'm not sure. I think something we can handle district-wide, but we do put it in staff handbooks. It is in the athletic handbook for all coaches. We do have we have an activities handbook that goes to activities advisors. So at least at the high school level, I know it's done there, and we can just check into making sure that we have that same consistent practice with the middle schools and even elementary.
This is high school I'm referring to when I've chaperoned. When I've chaperoned middle school, actually, we did not do a bank check in my experience, of course.
Okay.
Sounds like we have enough for a page 7.
I don't know. I mean, that's just something.
Good to know what's going on anyway. Any other comments, questions, Van? Well, thank you for all your hard work on this, not having a regulation and putting it together.
I think it's
And
a
it
step
only
in the
took
right
10 minutes for
direction.
the discussion, so did a good job. Appreciate it. Okay. Moving on to number 12, discussion on proposed elimination of CCSD Policy 360, workman compensation, and the CCSD Policy 425, industrial compensation, and the introduction of Policy 1050, occupational injury or disease in Sections 1000, all staff. First reading for discussion only. Mrs. Sears.
Thank you. So these two policies that are being eliminated applied, one applied to certified staff, one applied to classified staff, but they both addressed the very same thing, and that was the provision of workers' compensation coverage for all employees. So those two policies are being eliminated and replaced with a new policy, 1050, that goes into the all staff section. Our workers' compensation policy provides coverage for all employees as well as volunteers. So just to read into the record, workers' compensation, occupational injury, or disease, the Board of Trustees of the Carson City School District, respectively the board and district, is committed to a cost-effective and efficient means of fulfilling its obligation to provide workers' compensation insurance to cover the costs associated with occupational illness and disease. To that end, the district maintains a program of self-insurance, and the board directs the superintendent to develop regulations to ensure the effective administration of the workers' compensation program. And then there are some legal references to NRS. For those of you who are not really familiar with workers' compensation, it is a statutory coverage. So everything we do within the workers' compensation administration of that program is directed by Nevada revised statutes and Nevada administrative code. Okay? Any questions, suggestions regarding the policy?
Seeing none, we will move on to number 13, discussion on proposed elimination of CCSD Regulation 360, workman's compensation, and CCSD Regulation 425, industrial compensation, and the introduction of Regulation 1050, occupational injury or disease in Section 1000, all staff for discussion only. Mrs. Seer.
Thank you. So again, these two regulations that are being replaced with a common regulation that applies to all staff and volunteers. Given the length of the regulation, I'm not going to read it into the record. I will just note for the record the key elements of the regulation that are required in statute, and that is the provision of the coverage by employers. Section 1, notice of injury or occupational disease. This is the number of days each employee is required to provide notice to the employer of injury or exposure. Section 2, placement of employees who have occupational injuries or disease exposures, what we will do to return them to work. Section 3, occupational injury or disease benefits and workers' compensation leave of absence. This addresses the administration of the benefits themselves and any leave benefits. And again, those are administered in accordance with state law. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions or note any suggestions.
Anyone? Laurel?
Just one on page 3, under J, the first item, an employee's return to work, either full duty, permanent, modified duty, or temporary, will include the following conditions. I think you should remove the semicolon after return to work and just have a comma.
I'm sorry, what paragraph again?
J, the very first one, the first clause, an employee's return to work, comma, rather than a semicolon.
Yep. Okay. And I just noticed also that there needs to be a space on item I, first sentence, following expiration of the leave of absence. Needs to be a space between the word "the" and the word "leave."
Richard?
On page 2, paragraph D, is this wording from NRS? Is that the way the NRS or the NAC's worded? And the reason I ask that is if you have someone who's injured that cannot perform the same as everybody else, but this is saying they're expected to.
I can reword that. They would be subject to the same performance expectations within their modified duty.
Yeah, something like that, maybe.
Yeah.
Because if they can't,
And subject to disciplinary consequences for any sort of misconduct.
okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none, thank you so much for your time and effort on these. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night. Moving to 14, discussion on proposed changes to CCSD Policy 518, drug, alcohol use, and abuse. First reading for discussion only, Ms. Fushon, and welcome. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you very much. Policy 518, drug and alcohol use abuse, has not been revised since April 14th of 1992, other than a title change in October of 2012. So as such, a review of the policy was conducted by former Associate Superintendent of Educational Services, Mrs. Susan Kima, and the site leadership team at Carson High School. A few minor revisions are being proposed, including but not limited to adding our Safe Schools professionals to the district's drug advisory committee and to site-based core teams, as well as adding a reference to the district's behavioral matrix. Other than that, there was not a lot of suggested changes by the leadership team and by the athletics department at Carson High. So if you have any suggestions or questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Mike?
So the first one is, so you referenced the behavior matrix. Is that what we call the district progressive discipline plan now?
Yes.
Okay. And then the other one is kind of along the same lines of what I was asking Ann about the way they worded drugs in there. So chemical substances, and I don't know if we want to stick with chemical substances or do we want to say illicit drugs or illegal drugs? You know what I'm saying?
In the first paragraph?
Yeah. So I'm wondering if we want to use stronger language there, but those were my only two questions, really.
Richard?
Yeah, on page 2, on the paragraph A under intervention. Each team may consist of administrator, an SP, a counselor, a nurse, and at least one, and you have teachers, it should be at least one teacher, probably. Is there? Not on mine.
It's just hard to see.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I
that's
didn't
okay.
see that.
That's all right.
I get stronger glasses.
Joe?
Tasha, I just have questions for anybody, not being an expert on tobacco products. But when we talk about chemical substances, use of tobacco, does that inherently include vaping?
It does, and that's why I think it's worded, although I'm happy to take a look into it if there's a better descriptor other than chemical substances. But right now, some of the vaping pens that they use, they can put a variety of substances in there. Sometimes it's just a fluid with flavor. Sometimes it has nicotine, sometimes it has marijuana, sometimes it has other properties. So it would be a very long list if we tried to describe every single one of those items. But yes, it would include, that's more of the broader term for anything else that would fall underneath that.
And that's fine. I didn't want to include all that. I just didn't know if we needed to just say vaping or if it's just,
And it's hard to say,
it's
for instance,
included
like.
in our current description.
Correct. And I think like controlled substance is another word, that is hard to use because technically a vaping pen, if it has simply a flavored oil on it, technically is not a controlled substance in there. We still don't allow them. Yeah. Yeah, that's a hard one.
My question is kind of along the same line.
I think the big part of this when we reviewed it was making sure that we stayed in alignment with having the prevention, intervention, and postvention kind of laid out so that we're trying to be preventative and not just reactive to our students' needs. And again, incorporating our Safe Schools professionals, because at this point in time, they're really the folks that do most of the referring or the work or the intervention. So depending on the licensure of the specific SSP at a school, kind of dictates what interventions they can do. And if they can't do it at that individual site, then they'll do a referral out for services. So rather than getting too wordy about what that might look like and dictate that in here as well, it's again, the concept of doing prevention, making sure that we're doing drug awareness and having that be part of the curriculum, as well as then what do we do with intervention and providing supports to students when they come back to the environment.
Another question I kind of had in the back of my mind was, the district will encourage training of staff members. So, and I'm just wondering, is that something that maybe even encourage, and potentially that could be one of the things that is offered on an early release day when you guys do the things where teachers have choice. So maybe we could even use our Safe School professionals to provide some of that type of training for staff members. And then instead of them just being encouraged to get it, we're actually bringing it to them also. Correct.
And we actually do. Our school resource officers also are wonderful in terms of being helpful to the schools and providing that training. For instance, at the high school, they've come in and actually provided training to teachers on how to, recognize different devices that the students now have, because especially when it comes to the vaping pens, they look like USB devices. They have now some that are round and look like a compact, for females. So we've worked in conjunction with them as well. So absolutely, I think that's, we're trying to flush out a little bit more, again, obviously with the SSPs being still relatively new, who's responsible for providing what kind of training, what kind of services, but I think that's a good point.
Richard?
I just have one more under discipline on the first paragraph. Possession, use, sale, distribution, or being under the influence of tobacco. I didn't know you were under the influence of tobacco. So I think I know what you're getting at, but I don't know if that's quite worded right. I mean, how do you tell if somebody's under the influence of tobacco, I guess?
Right, I mean, use of tobacco.
But you say under the influence of tobacco, and I'm just wondering how you determine that.
Good point.
I'm not to
really
me,
sure.
I think that that's more inclusive, the possession, use, sale, distribution, or being under the influence of tobacco, alcohol, or other drugs. So to me, it's not limiting under the influence of tobacco, but you group that together because
We could divide that into two separate sentences if you're more comfortable with that. What we're seeing, the huge pieces that, or what we're seeing happening in the schools is we're catching the students vaping in the bathrooms or in the back hallways, et cetera. So it's more of we're seeing you use it, not so much that you're under the influence of. So I understand what you're saying, Trustee Varner. I can separate that in two sentences if you're more comfortable with that. Lupe?
Tasha, I'm curious, how do parents volunteer to be part of these committees? How do they learn about these opportunities?
Well, within, right now, when it comes to the district's overall drug advisory committee, what we're looking to do is we currently do not have this overarching committee. Our counselors are having meetings twice a year with community stakeholders, parents, school trustees, I believe, are on that as well. So what we've asked that group to take on this responsibility, to put that on their agendas for their 2 meetings per year. So that is something that we'd have to go out and promote that as being a task of that committee, so that more parents who are interested in that could volunteer for it. So we'll make sure that we get that information out to our folks. When it comes to the core teams on the individual sites, those are usually what this was intended to be is the teacher that is working with the student, the SSP that's working with the student, the counselor working with student administrator. So those that are intimately familiar with that student, and you would be working in conjunction with the parent of that student at that point in time, if that makes sense. Parents are involved in other ways. So when it refers to the discipline matrix, the behavioral matrix, each school has that's required to have a discipline committee meeting at the beginning of year, actually several, where the school develops their discipline plan. So that is something that as parents are invited to be part of as well. So this becomes part of that conversation because it's tied in that manner. Does that make sense? But I think Trustee Ramirez, I think your point, which I take to heart, is that we need to inform parents of these opportunities and invite them to be part of those committees and have their voice heard. So, and we'll make sure we address that with our principals.
Be fabulous. Thank you.
Mike?
So, and just so you know, Lupe, in those counselor advisory meetings, there are several parents who have been attending. So typically, I know Mr. Stokes was at one, Sue and I have been at the last couple. So I mean, but there's several parents. I mean, we had a couple really vocal parents at our last one, I think it was in April of this year. And then a question for you or something to think about. I think with the discipline, I think it has to be more centrally located under some of those new laws they passed this year. So I don't know exactly if that's going to change the process of each site doing their own discipline hearings or if there needs to be a consolidated effort, but maybe we want to look into that.
I'm not sure what you mean by,
So in the progressive discipline plans, there's something, and I don't have the exact law in my mind right now, you'd have to look it up, but it needs to be more consolidated based on the new laws they passed.
okay.
And so I'm not exactly sure what that looks like. I just know that, like we were told, that it's going to have to be more centralized in Lyon County. So
Okay.
I'm sure the same provisions are going to need to be looked at here.
Okay. We do have, keeping that in mind, and I'm not familiar with what you're referring to, so I'll definitely look into that. But, so we have a district-wide progressive behavior plan. We refer to it as a behavioral matrix, so that's district-wide. And that's so that we have continuity from with 6 elementary schools, from elementary school to elementary school, or 2 middle schools, or the 2 high schools, so that we're addressing issues in the same manner. In addition to that, each site has to create their own progressive discipline plan, which is not actually detailing how you're addressing individual disciplinary issues. That plan is more about addressing like a request for removal of a student from a classroom by a teacher. How does that look? School procedures. So, but they work together. I mean, they're 2 parts of the same thing, but I will look into that and make sure that we're in compliance with those changes.
And if I find anything, I'll share it with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments on this? Okay. Moving on to number 15, discussion on newly proposed CCSD Policy 200, instructional plans, first reading. Ms. Fushon.
Thank you. So currently, there is no board policy for lesson plans. Instead, the district's expectation for lesson planning is briefly outlined in Administrative Regulation 200.1. So that is a strange thing to have a reg without a corresponding policy. This past year, 2 separate work sessions to put together a board policy were conducted during our principals meetings. Input regarding the existing administrative regulation was also solicited from OCEA. As a result, the newly developed Policy 200 instructional plans has been drafted for review. Is specifically requested by stakeholders that worked on those committees. The policy clearly delineates the differences between teacher lesson plans, substitute plans, and emergency lesson plans. So when you're taking a look at that, specifically what that means is a lesson plan would be the daily and weekly plans that a teacher is writing to drive instruction. A substitute plan is put into place so that if you have a substitute teacher come into the classroom, that not only do they have that instructional plan, that daily plan of what they're supposed to do, but they have the additional materials that they need to know, for instance, what students on IEPs 504s, what the teacher's classroom management plan is, what the school's emergency plans are. And then the third one is the emergency lesson plan, and that is sometimes we have teachers just as any of us would have the same situation, that have an emergency come up, and they might be, called away to handle, a sick loved one, for instance, and don't have an opportunity or the time to put a lesson plan in place. Well, we want instruction continue for students in that classroom. So by having an emergency lesson plan, it's related to the curriculum for each course, but might not necessarily be specifically in alignment with exactly what would be going on if the teacher was there. I'll give you an example. As a former English teacher, I would do maybe a mini unit on parts of speech. So it's going to support the students. It's tied to my curriculum, but I might be working on Romeo and Juliet with kids. So, for this emergency lesson plan, it's out of sequence for what the kids would be doing, but at least it's tied to the curriculum and supporting our students and making sure that they have something worthwhile to do versus maybe coming in and watching a movie or something because there was no lesson plan left behind. So when we met within our principals groups, and again, as when I spoke to Mr. Wallace, that was one thing that it seemed all parties wanted, was that real clear delineation between what all of those things meant, and then making sure that one of the pieces in here says that it is to be included in every school's handbook for the faculty and staff, so that it's known very clearly what's expected at each site level. But there's been a lot of confusion about what a sub-plan is versus an emergency plan. So that's why this one specifically specifies all 3 different categories.
Any comments, suggestions, Laurel?
Just a comment on the bullet for seating charts, just to add the closed parenthesis around if applicable.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I
Mike?
think this is good, and you leave it open enough so that principals could pick those things that are important for them that year if they're focused on in different instructional areas. So I liked this.
Richard?
I'm just curious, with all the new curriculum that the district has adopted just recently, the into reading, the new science and math curriculum, I'm just wondering if the teachers are going to be given some time, maybe on an early release day, to help prepare the emergency lesson plans? Or is this just going to be another thing that we ask them to do?
Well, I'm certainly going to suggest to our principals that they build that time in. To me, that would make the most sense. So sites for our back-to-school days, the site has the first full day that teachers are back to do site-based professional learning and training for their teachers. So it would be an opportune time, I think, to give teachers opportunity to sit down and work this together. It also makes sense to me that this is done in grade-alike clusters or PLCs. So for instance, at the high school, last year we started this work and I had all Algebra 1 teachers sit down together and they wrote one emergency lesson plan for Algebra 1. So I could see that working in elementary school. I could see it working in middle school as well. So that suggestion will be made to all of the site administrators to kind of build some time in for our teachers to do this. And then those plans, they don't have to be rewritten every year. They need to be looked at and updated and make sure that they're still relevant. But that way, it's going to save some instructional time and some lost instructional time in the classroom when our folks unfortunately are out without knowing that they're going to be out.
I think if you could do that, I'm sorry.
You know, one of the reasons I think that's good, especially if you do it as a team, is because what happens is, say like there's an emergency, and you're out, well, all the other teachers in your subject or your grade level are scrambling to get together lesson plans for a day because your principal doesn't necessarily have it, so.
Absolutely. And yes, I'll strongly recommend that. I mean, I cannot set that schedule for them, but I can recommend that. I'm sure most of them will see the value to that.
I think there's a value, and I think it'd go a long ways with the teachers if we could do that.
And the sub-plans too. The intent would be to do that with sub-plans too. That's not something that you can do for the previous year for the following year because you have to look at your new students. But just to give you kind of a concept of what this would look like is each teacher would have maybe a 1-inch 3-ring binder for their classroom where they're putting all these required elements in, and that lives in that teacher's, on the desk. The suggestion would be to tell all of your teachers in the same building that it needs to be in the same place. So any substitute who comes in knows that it's going to be on the desk next to the computer screen, something like that. But yeah, I mean, to give them time to do that piece too would make sense.
Yeah, because the standards have changed too, and they seem to change quite often, so.
Mm-hmm.
I see the value in it, and I just want to reiterate, the same point. I think it makes a lot of sense to have it. It's worthwhile for the students, but yeah, I think the teachers have to be given the ability to prepare it. And depending on the site, those abilities, aren't always there. So I think just a strong encouragement for what that means
Absolutely.
would be a good idea.
Any other comments? Seeing none, we will move on to number 16, discussion on proposal to eliminate CCSD Regulation 200.1, lessons plans for discussion only. Mrs. Fushon.
So the guidance that was previously provided in Administrative Regulation 200.1, lesson plans, has been transferred to the newly drafted Policy 200 instructional plans. As such, Administrative Regulation 200.1 is no longer necessary and therefore recommended to be eliminated.
Any questions, comments? Seeing none, we will move on to number 17. Discussion and possible action to approve the adoption of 2019 Career and Technical Education CTE materials for grades 9 through 12 for the Carson City School District to include Health Science 1 and 2, Sports Medicine, Emergency Medical Technician, Pharmacy Practices, Cyber Security, and Agricultural Mechanics Technology as budgeted for possible action. Mrs. Fushon and Mrs. Ruff, welcome.
Thank you, President Wilkie. So prior to the 2018-19 school year, instructional materials for current technical education programs were not subject to state oversight. In July of 2018, the Nevada Department of Education changed that practice statewide and subsequently directed districts to retroactively complete the instructional materials adoption process for materials that are currently in use as well as for new materials. Since the state is implementing a new state approval process for textbook adoptions, they've encouraged districts to complete the instruction materials adoption cleanup process prior to January of 2020. So Mrs. Ruff, who just had knee surgery and is still with us today, which I appreciate, she's our district's CTE coordinator. She's led our efforts to complete the instructional materials adoption process for both previously purchased and currently in use materials, as well as new materials. All materials have been budgeted for in our state CTE grants. And in your packets, you have a list of the materials that are presented for adoption this evening. So there's 3 of them that are currently in use and are considered part of the cleanup process. That is for sports medicine, emergency medical technician, and pharmacy practice. And then there's 3 others that are new for this year, and that is Health Science 1 and 2, the one for cybersecurity. There's actually 2 for cybersecurity, and 1 for agricultural mechanics technology. So that being said, Ms. Ruff will now explain the process and the timeline that we followed for the aforementioned programs.
President Wilkie, members of the board. Sorry, I'm a little shaky from my medicine. In July of last year.
You have to say your name for the record.
Oh, did I not my say my Candy Ruff? Sorry, Candy Ruff for the record. In July of last year at the Nevada Association of Career and Technical Education, we met with Randy Honeywell, who's the assistant director of CRALEO, and her suggestion was that we get together a giant work group, inventory all of the things that Carson City used, have Lyon County and Story and Clark and White Pine all submit their instructional materials so that we could part some of this out. So we thought it was a great idea. And in August, I started collecting all of the information from our 19 teachers, put it on a spreadsheet. In November, Mrs. Honeywell sent out a survey so that we could upload all of our information. And then in January, late January, she pushed back out who had responded to the call. About half of the districts did not respond, and the bigger districts did not respond. So looking at the spreadsheets that were sent back to us, we realized that we weren't going to be able to part out any of it to anybody else. So with the beginning of 2 new programs of study in architectural, in agricultural mechanics and cybersecurity, we sent out an RFP, a request for proposal, for instructional materials for that, and also for the health science textbook, because our health science textbook was out of date. And so we went through the regular process of committee, parent review. We used all of the rubrics, but then we also went back and did the same review of existing materials that we would then purchase. So we have 23 materials in CTE, distinct materials from many different publishers. Several are digital resources like Project Lead the Way, Knowledge Matters in marketing. And so on May 8th, we had a great work day because the plan with Mrs. Kima was to just adopt all of it. Even if it did not have to go to the board, even if it did not have to go to the state, we needed to verify that the instructional materials that we were using in class aligned with the standards and aligned with student need, and also aligned with teacher need, so that as we got ready to review instructional materials, we would know if there were purchases that needed to be made outside what we already had. So May 8th, we all got together, and we had a giant round-robin activity where everybody looked at everybody else's textbooks, which was fabulous, because I think it really gave teachers, like the photo teacher, Kara Farron, she could look at the health science book and say, so this is what it looks like for you, this is what it looks like for me. It was a tremendous collaborative experience on May 8th. And then we contacted parents. So if you'll notice in your packets that there were parent representatives on each of those committees. And they finished their review. The last parent came in on June 20th, and I completed all of the rubrics and all of the alignment of the chapters in the book with the actual standard, because we thought that was valuable information as well. Some of the textbooks speak to the employability skills. It's not a requirement, but it is nice to have documented that these additional materials are available. So we come before you now with, you have all of the rubrics. It's much bigger. And I will be back before January 20th with about 8 more. So anybody have any questions about the process?
Questions,
Questions about the
comments?
textbooks? So the sports medicine and EMT textbooks are aligned to the ones that are utilized at Western Nevada College. So there's the Pearson textbook for cybersecurity and the CompTIA textbook are also used by Western Nevada College. So our effort was to align with them so that students are moving up to WNC would have a continuum of education.
That's great. It's a good way to look at it. Any other questions, comments? Richard?
I'd just like to thank you for the work you've done. I've had the opportunity to visit with you and see the program firsthand. And I think it's been an outstanding job you've done and everybody that's involved in that process. So I think this is going to continue to make it better, so thank you.
Thank you. So before January, I will be back with culinary, photography, marketing, and we have one health information management text, which the teachers rejected. So we have an RFP out for perhaps a better product. So I will be back with another slew of these, which will look exactly the same.
Well, we look forward to it. We appreciate your time being here, especially with you having knee surgery. That's pretty incredible.
So I move that the Carson City School District Board of Trustees approve the recommended 2019 adoption of 9 through 12 career and technical education materials to include Health Science 1 and 2, Sports Medicine, Emergency Medical Technician, Pharmacy Practice, Cybersecurity, and Agricultural Mechanics Technology as proposed by the Committee for the Carson City School District as budgeted, as presented this evening.
Motion by Mike, second by Joe. Any other discussion on the board? Seeing none, any public comment? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? We will see you before January. Thank you.
Speedy recovery.
Yeah, speedy recovery.
And if you didn't catch everything we said tonight, it's recorded.
Going on to number 18, discussion and possible action on the Nevada Association of School Board nominations to be considered for recognition during the 2019 annual conference. So in your packet, you have all of them, all the suggestions. So what I thought we would do is go through them like one by one, if you have suggestions for number 1, and then number 2, if that's okay with everybody, just to keep it quick. Okay, so number 1 is the school administrator for the year. And we have a suggestion of Zona. Any other suggestions? Mike?
I suggest Amy Robinson from Carson Middle School. Dean of Students.
Any other suggestions? Laurel?
I was just wondering, because usually they have this divided into secondary and elementary schools, and I didn't open the email to see if it's divided it's not, okay.
In fact, it says you may nominate administrators at the elementary, middle, or high school level for this award. The board may nominate 2 school administrators in this category. Okay? So does anybody else have any suggestions? Does anybody have any opposition to going with these 2 suggestions? Okay, moving on then. Who wants to write Mr. Zona's? And actually, this one's easy because we did it last year, so it just needs to be updated. So that would be Laurel.
I'm already working with Dan and some teachers. I'm working with Dan Sadler to get some information on Amy, so I could write Amy's.
Okay. And this is July. So when you do these, they need to be into Renee by August 1st, and we can look over the drafts And then if there's any suggestions or changes that we need to make, and I'll just get with you when you have them all, so that we can get them.
First, so it'll be done before then.
Well, it's good, because otherwise I'd have to hunt you down.
I'll be somewhere really fun for you,
Oh,
Stacy.
good. Thank you. Lake Tahoe is preferable. Going on to number 2, school district employee making a difference. You have a couple suggestions here. Does anybody have any others? I have Carrie Pryor for this. She does a lot with the new hires, and there's a lot of different stuff, and I think that she fits this. And we get to do 2 on this one, too.
I think Carrie would be a great suggestion. I also think Miriam Torres from Empire, and she did all of those parent and family engagement activities. And I think that it would be really nice to recognize a classified employee.
And she did a great job at that gala. That was really,
And she was
really
also
good
a
job.
super mom helper when her daughter was in my class, so she's well deserving.
Any other suggestions? Laurel?
I'm just wondering if some of these who are teachers wouldn't fit into the innovative educator. Because 3 of the 3 there are teachers rather than school district employees, so it could be, but there could be another category for them.
Yeah. And now reading over what it says too is, yeah, the school board may nominate administrators at elementary, middle, and high school levels for this award.
But then when you read,
Mm-mm. And I guess it doesn't have to be, because it does have may nominate. So we could take that to that level. So.
that might be what you were thinking of, Laurel. That could be what you were thinking of when you were saying secondary or elementary.
Okay, any other discussion on this one? So that means I'm doing Carrie's, and Mike, you're doing Torres, and maybe you can get with Lupe. Maybe Lupe can help you with that one too, because she worked with her a lot on that gala.
And I've talked to Susan Squires too, so.
Okay.
get some information.
Okay, good. Moving right along. District level administrator of the year impacting student achievement. This one is also may nominate administrators. It's 2, we are able to nominate 2 district level administrators in this category. And so we have the big one we all think is, go ahead.
Is Carrie Pryor a district level administrator? No? Okay, just checking, because I'm not.
That's why we're using the may there for that. Because it just says may, it doesn't have, it says have to. So that's how I'm taking it anyway. And I am the president, the person chairing the nominating committee this year, because I'm past president, so we're gonna make that.
And just because it says we can nominate 2, I mean, I think if we're all in agreement, I think AJ's done a fine job, and I think that let's put all our efforts behind that and get a strong letter together. And
So that would be AJ. So maybe, Mr. Stokes, you can help us with that letter. The other, and kind of want to, and I don't know how to really pool it, but because of all the work that AJ did at the legislature and working with the legislators and Jeremy and policy people, Paul Johnson from White Pine was also involved with that too.
so why don't we nominate him?
So I'd like to add that, so that maybe it could be a joint win for both of you, because you both put in so much effort and had so much knowledge at the table. It could have been so much worse if you guys hadn't been there. Right. On both first and last, depending, doesn't matter which way we go, you're first. So,
And just having been on that committee for NASB, they do value when a board nominates someone from another district. That is something that they take into consideration.
So, Mr. Stokes, if you'll take the AJ part, I can take the Paul Johnson part. I can get with White Pine. Okay. Director of the Year. So this would probably be Laurel and Mike would have suggestions, because you guys, we both, we all are on the joint board and the executive. Is there anybody other than you that we can nominate? Just kidding.
Feel free to nominate whoever you want.
No, I had to do that.
I think Mike is a good director. I'm
do
just
too.
wondering if there's any other counties that we'd want to nominate too. I'm trying to.
I think, like Dawn Miller, she serves on the state school board, and
That's
you
a
know what I
good
mean?
one.
I think that
Yeah,
she does a
she
lot
would
behind
be.
the scenes and advocating for school boards.
She was really involved
During
in
the
the last.
legislature too.
That is.
Yeah, she always has good input too. Okay, that sounds good.
See, it's not all about self-promotion, Stacy.
Oh, you just like to look so selfless on the board. Such a martyr. Moving on to number 5, Veteran School Board Member of the Year. These are school board members who have served more than one complete 4-year term. So that would be Laurel. You're on your second term.
I'm on my second, Joe.
Yes, it would be the 3 of us would be one of those.
I guess my thought is, reading through individual school board member of the year, I thought that would be a good fit for Stacy, because
Because I have my 2 years.
you've had
2 terms.
2 terms. And then I think that last year, Laurel, I think you got that award, so
Director.
director. Okay.
I think it was Bridget from Lions.
Bridget from Lion. So we could put Joe there.
Yeah, we could nominate Joe.
We'll nominate
That's fine,
Joe.
but I think I think Stacy, with all she's done at the, at the NASB level as well, is certainly a strong candidate.
Well, and that's what I was thinking, but if
But I fit in veteran.
individual school
true.
board member
So-
of the year, so she'd fit in there.
Yeah.
And she has the qualifications for
Okay.
that one.
So we'll put Joe as veteran. Yeah, who wants to write about Joe?
If Joe gets me information, I'd be happy to assist with that.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. New school board member of the year. That would be ones in their first term. So,
I mean, Mike is still in his first term.
yeah, huh. You haven't had a reelection, huh?
Yeah.
So Mike,
Definitely Mike, yeah, definitely Mike, yeah.
and if you want to give me information, I'll write it up.
I was gonna say,
You're probably gonna want to proof it though.
I'm not on board to write anybody's yet, so I'll in
Yeah,
turn.
you want to do,
Let's
you can do Joe's.
swap info
Yeah,
and I'll
'cause you
write
guys
mine.
are
If you want to
talking.
screenshot me your notes and then I'll write them on the 14th.
This is our usual method. I had to write mine on a bus in Chicago because I was there for that NASB conference. So we're doing much better this year. I'm very impressed with us. Individual school board member, so that's me because I'm the 2-year person. I don't know who wants to write it? Dawn, you're not writing anything yet. We'll make it you.
Send me the information.
I will.
Send me what you want to say.
Send me what you want to say. NASB School Board of the Year. So this would be us because we didn't get it last year.
But, and we already have something written, don't we?
Yes. We do. We can just update it. To add even the greater achievements we've acquired this last year, because we have these brand new 2 newbies that have brought so much to our board that we can add all that good stuff. Superintendent of the Year, Mr. Stokes says he doesn't want to do it.
Sorry, by proxy.
Selfless.
It's you, Mr. Stokes.
we were thinking, but Mr. Stokes, why don't you tell us about your suggestion? Terry White?
Well, Mrs. White has been recognized by NAS as Nevada's Superintendent of the Year. And,
And tell the, I don't know if the new people know what NAS is.
oh, sorry, it's the Nevada Association of School Superintendents. So she met with the governor this year during the legislative session. She runs all of the NAS meetings. Whenever there's a call to go to the testimonial table during the legislation or legislative year, and if that matter that's being discussed is applicable to education across the state, she usually speaks as the representative of the superintendent. So she's been successful in her work and I think is well thought of and certainly would be someone that I think that would qualify nicely in that spot.
Would you be willing to write a letter for the?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
Anybody have any problems with that nomination? Okay. Moving on to NASB's award for individual friend of K through 12 public education or advocacy group. And this is to recognize invaluable service provided to the Nevada Children's by the advocating on behalf of the K-2 to 12 public education across the state, particularly during the sessions of the Nevada legislature, or working in other direct ways to improve K through 12 public education in Nevada. So using those terms, I was thinking Educate Nevada Now or Hope for Nevada. Oh, it is, so it would be Fund Our Future because they were backed by, they were backed by Educate Now. So we can look at which one, if either. Anybody else have any other suggestions to think about?
So I guess we'd have to figure it out though before we voted, right? Which one we're gonna say?
No, because we're not voting. We're just,
I thought it was for possible action.
I guess we are voting.
I guess
So-
what we could do is even at this stage, because we've got time, if we get all of our letters written and can review them, then we could maybe pick our better letters. I don't know.
Yeah, let's see.
And I mean, and I liked Mr. Stokes' idea about the Carson City Schools Foundation, and I hadn't initially thought of that. You know, I was thinking Food for Thought, who for years and years has been providing food for kids with food insecurities, which is huge because, I mean, these kids don't have food, they're not gonna learn.
I think they'd be really good for next year because there isn't a legislative session. Because they really put together they put in their legislative session.
And I agree, and that's why I didn't really put that forward, because I was thinking the same thing, but what I'm thinking is, so our foundation, they're trying to get off the ground, so I mean, is that one to look at down the road and we focus on one of the advocacy groups this time? Or I think that's the discussion we need to have is, because I think, I mean, we have to value the work of that team. They're doing a lot for our schools and their community members who are giving up a lot of time for, you know, our organization. So I think we just need to have that discussion.
I would agree. I think they'll have a stronger pull next year because of all the stuff that they're getting ready. I mean, they had the rodeo and they're building on that. And there's going to be a big educational summit November 4th, I think, that they're going to be involved in too. So I think they'll have a better chance of winning next year too because of the progression that they're making.
And I think probably Carson City is gonna have a tough time just because there was like a sweep last year, so we'll see how it goes.
We can't help that our people are better than
That's because we
everyone
put in a
else.
lot of nominations, because some districts didn't put nominations in some of the categories. And Stacy was honest to make sure that we put in a bunch, so we did.
And I'm just wondering too, I mean, there's so many groups we could put for this, but I can't, I don't want us to neglect the library folks.
Right.
I mean, all they do, yeah, okay, so it's been fairly recent we did them?
We did them last.
Did we? Okay.
We did them
okay.
last year.
All right, then I'm okay with that.
But I think that I really support the idea of picking one of those groups because really changing the funding for education in the state is key. And so, I mean, I think that we probably need to give them some recognition for that.
AJ, you don't remember which one they were, are you? The Educate, or is it the Fund Nevada Now? I was looking through my emails, but yeah, Fund Our Future. So maybe we can just work, we know that we want one of the ones that advocated, we did a proclamation. That's the group we're talking about, right? That we did a proclamation for?
I want to say that was Fund Our Future.
Fund Our Future, okay. That's what I thought, Fund Our Future. So we'll do that. Okay. Anybody want to write it? Okay, I'll write that one then. I can always call Michelle. I'll write it. Going on to Innovative Educator of the Year. And now this one has to be really good because we've won this 2 years in a row. I'm looking for a three-peat here.
So I'd like to add Ananda Campbell to the list. So she does a lot for students in and out of the classroom, so.
This has got to be our toughest category because we only have one and there are so many innovative educators in our district. It's just. We should just come up with the Carson City School District Award.
Not knowing enough about what these individual innovations are, because that seems to be what the driving factor is what is it that's innovative that they're looking for? And so having a little more information about that, about each, yeah, and just what the program, or what the, I don't want to say program, but what they've done in the classroom and where that's leading to is, yeah.
And what makes it different from
what
other education?
Yeah. How is it leading?
Well, and I mean, if you look at some of these, I mean, Jeff Hendricks taking students with disabilities skiing. I mean, I think that's an opportunity that a lot of those kids probably would not get. And so, I mean, I think that's kind of, I think that probably, I mean, I'm even looking at the people up in number 2. You know, I know Nick does a great job. Bonnie is fantastic teacher. I mean, trust me, she's excellent at everything she does. So I think we have a lot of options. It's a hard one.
I know.
No, it's really hard, but, you know, I mean, it's hard to rank them, but you know, taking students with disability skiing really stands out to me. I mean, that's, you know, that's out of the classroom exposure to, you know, just, you know, the world, yeah.
Is that who we want to go with?
So, Mr. Stokes, do you know who has information on this individual?
I selected these individuals from the School Foundation mini grant winners. So I suggest that maybe we do Plan A and Plan B just in case there was some reason that these folks did not actually have a chance to carry out their activity. I mean, I don't know. I'm assuming that they did. But I would have to probably do a little more homework to learn more about the actual day that they did this event.
So we could do that. We could look at that and we could look at Mrs. Campbell and then bring it back to the board and you guys can read both of them and figure out which one you think would be a good thing. So You want to do Campbell's? And then Richard, you're not writing anything yet. Would you like to? You're lucky as a new board member, you're not writing all of them.
You know what I do like about with the after-school gate program is that there's a lot of districts that don't offer any gate programming to their students or anything like that. And so this type of enrichment might be a way to let other districts in the state know that you can't, here's a way to offer additional programming for gate students. I kind of like that idea.
Well, and I don't think it would hurt to select an elementary teacher either. I mean, at the last two we've had were secondary teachers, so,
Recognize the Lob Singer name because we had, they might. Not that it's not awesome that the integrated manufacturing is really.
So maybe without getting too much in depth on those three, but to look, like we have to find out if Hendricks went through with it and what results came through and maybe the educational part of it that went with it. And then you can just do a mini thing on Campbell and then maybe you can do Benson because you've done the gate, but not too, don't get too in depth, just kind of see where it's all going and then we can kind of bat it around from there.
So I'm wondering if instead of naming I apologize, Renee. If the three of us got together with that information, make sure that if this guy was able to follow through with his task, if Bonnie actually was able to have the after school, you know what I mean? And then
I know that they did, and I know she and Jana Robb also had that after-school class.
So we could just leave this one off. You guys can do those three and then we'll bring it back at maybe the next board meeting. You guys can bring it back and we can, and discuss it then, Mr. Pavakis.
I just want to make sure that you're not appointing a committee to do anything because that committee would be subject to the open meeting law.
No, we are not. We are asking 3 individuals to come back. No,
You can ask maybe 2 individuals.
2 individuals.
Laurel and
Oh, and then Richard gets out of it. Okay, fine. I see how that works, Richard. Only 2 people. But even if they come, if she writes one and he writes one and he writes one and they bring it to a meeting, not that they're talking by themselves to figure out, but if Laurel wrote it and Richard wrote it and then we had those 3 letters in our packet, we couldn't discuss it at a meeting?
That would be absolutely fine. I thought you wanted the 3 of them to get together and pick one.
Oh, no, that'd be big trouble with putting those 3 together. Okay. That would never on my head. So we're just gonna do individual letters and then give them to Renee, and they'll be in our packet. So you're still stuck with Hendricks.
I tried.
Good try, but not happening. Yeah, Dawn's writing all this down to put in my report. Going on to number 11, Media Award for Outstanding Educational Reporting in Television, Radio, and Online. And we were thinking maybe Carson Online. To keep it local. We did Nevada Appeal last year. And so.
Actually, we did Mr. Brady, Bill Brady from.
Oh, that's right, because we won. That's right.
I don't think we'll win it this year, just saying.
Ye of little faith. Come on.
All these NASB
Oh, I did
directors and
Carson Now.
stuff, you
What
think
did I
we'd
say?
win
Oh,
something, I
Carson
don't know.
Online. I meant Carson Now, not our online school.
Madam President, I volunteer to do that one.
Okay, thank you. Everybody's okay with Carson Online? CarsonNow.com. They do a lot of tweeting, it's very good too. Moving on to 13, Local Governance Team of the Year. So this is probably one we shouldn't put ourselves at because we won last year.
We skipped 12, I think.
Oh, what's 12? Oh, Media Award for Outstanding Educational Reporting in a Print journalism format. So that would be the appeal.
Just another thought, what about, like the Nevada Independent that covered some really good stuff during,
They're not print, they're online, but they don't, I mean, you can print it out and,
Okay,
they send
sorry, I
emails,
was
but-
thinking, because I, read things online, so. that's what I
yeah,
think.
I had them down too, and then I read it and it says print. So. So, does Pioneer have a school newspaper? Maybe we should suggest Jason, he should start one so we can nominate them next year. Because I think because before Brady, it was the White Pine High School newspaper that won, to be honest. So,
I mean, are we reaching here to try to get something
yes,
local, or this should be a category we should maybe reach out?
we could reach out. What paper would you like?
No, I don't know.
So we actually have, at Carson High, Mr. Brady does the Senator Square, but Pat Quinn Davis and her class actually do a newspaper for the high school as well.
And Mrs. Fuchon, would you like to take that one on? Thank you. We had to make sure you felt part of the group.
Well, then we're gonna get grass. Do you want that?
That's what I want. I want to see what he can do.
Okay, moving on to local governance team of the year then.
So last year we nominated Lyon County. So I mean, is there another county that?
Well, it's not Washoe.
Yeah, we.
If it was this year, if it was next year, I would say Lander because they have 5 new board members and they're doing a great job, but they're pretty new for this award. But, and White Pine's got 3 new members.
Pine won school board last year.
So you got Churchill, Douglas. They had their stuff. Maybe Douglas, although that makes it hard. We're already doing Terry White. But that's, you put it all together.
Oh, sorry, it includes the superintendent.
So you do that one. Elko.
I mean, I guess I would just want to know, do we know that these teams are working together well? I mean, I don't want to just nominate somebody to nominate somebody and then we have no information,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that does narrow it down, because I could tell you a few of those that don't.
Don't tell us.
I
Just
know.
tell us those that do.
I don't know on the record. Yeah, that might be one to bring back to a different meeting. We can check.
And when we say governance team, I mean, I don't know if it's a reach, but I mean, we have, tonight was no exception. We have conversations about our executive, our district executive folks and how we're working with, the unions and whatnot, if you will, here, and how we work so well together. Can we? It was 2 years ago we got it? Okay.
Because I was on the selection panel that year.
Okay. Yeah, all right. So if that was that recent, then we probably shouldn't do it again, but.
Okay, so we'll put this one up.
Rich looks like he wants another trophy before he leaves.
And I wouldn't mind having one under my presidency either. I've been VP, but never been president during one, so. There we go. We'll just do us again. Because if we don't get school board of the year, it'd be nice to get something. And then, of course, the one we don't have to discuss or anything, because it's the board secretary, and we all know we would never be anywhere without our Miss Cortez.
AJ?
Easy one.
Yeah, AJ, you're writing that one. Actually, we vote it every year, so if you could update ours.
Could you get a graph together how many times she has to track us down, multiple calls?
Colorful charts. Okay, there you go. All right. Oh, Jose, we left you out. Okay, so if anybody needs help, Jose's available because he wasn't assigned.
Do you have examples? I've never seen one of these, so could I see some examples as well, possibly?
Yeah, we
things
have
you've written.
examples from last year.
That'd
She
be
can
great.
send you some.
You might just send it to everybody, just so everybody has an updated one.
Students wouldn't know what either, okay? And these don't have to be, totally perfect when you turn them in or anything either, because we have lots of people like Laurel and Dan Davis last year proofread everything and made mine look up much better than they actually were.
I had one page of like maybe 6 partial sentences of bullet points that she sent me. And I was like, well, okay.
Thank you very much. We're at 9:00, so this is gonna get a little faster here. We need an action.
Since you have one or more that you are going to bring back, you might table this and approve it next time.
Okay, that sounds good. So we will move on with
I
lack
move
of an
that-
action.
I move that we table this item until the next board meeting.
Mike, second by Richard. All those in favor?
Aye.
I was getting there. Oh, no, I wasn't. I was gonna do it afterwards. I'm sorry, is there any public comments on this? Loretta, do you have anything to tell us? Okay. Sorry, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, thank you, Laurel, for helping me out there. 19, informational update on progress towards the possible purchase of the real property and improvements located at 1600 Snyder Avenue in Carson City. For discussion only, Mr. Stokes.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. For the record, Richard Stokes. I had intended to go into more detail in my presentation regarding the information that was in your packet. That changed last night at about 4:30 when I received information from John Uhart that our original offer for 1600 Snyder Avenue had essentially been rejected by the seller. And because the letter of intent that we had submitted actually expired as of July the 8th, 2019 at 5 p.m., there wasn't much that we could do at that point. So I had an opportunity to visit with Mr. Uhart, Mr. Pavlakis, as we were kind of trying to understand this whole situation. So if we are to, well, let me say first that through the day, which is today, speaking with Mr. Uhart, he was able to contact the seller, and the seller, in their thinking, were able to modify the letter of intent because they had written a counter proposal to what we had submitted. And so in their counter proposal, they extended their letter of intent to go through July 18th, 2019. So the original statement had tonight being as the end of the letter of intent. And if that would have been the case, then there's nothing that we could do. I explained to Mr. Uhart that because this decision to modify any of our original proposal would have to be action taken by the board, that we wouldn't be able to do that until a duly advertised and agendized meeting of the board could take place. And the earliest we could do that would be next week sometime, or wait until our regular meeting, which is the 23rd of June, which would be our next meeting. So within the counter proposal from the seller, they, and you should have a little document that I put together just at the end of the day here. So they've raised the purchase price to $5,670,000, which is an increase of $170,000, which essentially would cover the realtor's commission fees. So I think that rather than the seller agreeing to pay for the commission that would be due to the real estate agent, they put that back on the district by raising the price by what that amount would be by 3%. The other item that was a change, so remember that we had initially proposed that we would use $50,000 for earnest money, and that all of that earnest money would be refundable to the district, even if we were to elect not to go through with the purchase of the property. New language proposed by the seller was that immediately upon acceptance of the letter of intent, $25,000 would be distributed immediately to the seller, and that amount would be non-refundable because they essentially had taken the property or would take the property off of the market. And so if we were then to elect not to go through with the sale of the property, that $25,000 would be non-refundable.
Somebody object.
However, if we were to carry through and purchase the property, that $25,000 could be attributed to the final purchase price. So it wouldn't be for nothing, but only we couldn't have it returned to the district if we chose not to go through with the sale. Another change had to do with the feasibility period. So the buyer has changed or proposed that our proposal of 90 days be reduced to 60 days, and that our 90 days to have some flexibility to do the space on the word, the assessments, the investigation as to whether or not the building was up to par. We had in our original plan had that down for 90 days. They've shortened that to 30 days. So any due diligence that we're doing would be reduced to 30 days. So really a total of 90 days if we're waiting for professional feedback from any of these inspections or appraisals or tests. And then I guess finally, their letter of intent would expire on July 18th. So again, if we choose to do nothing, the whole process becomes null and void after July 18th, 2019. So I wanted to have that conversation with you tonight. Our agendized item allows us to have a conversation about progress being made toward the purchase of that property. And again, if we have some opportunities here. It's in negotiations. So I don't think we should look at this as, it's the end of the world. I think we can think about what are those items that we could consider with regard to what has been proposed, but we just can't take any action on that tonight. That action would have to take place in a subsequent board meeting, either on the 16th, which we've checked, and this room is open on that night. And I would like to do it in a public forum rather than up at the district office. This way, people who are interested in the process can watch and can hear what's going on so that we're very transparent throughout this process.
Thank you, Mr. Stokes.
Mr.
Walker?
Stokes, we were worried about being able to get this done in 90 days. I mean, I don't find these terms favorable. I mean, I don't think that's, I guess I'm just not in agreement with them.
So let me give a little more update to let you know what's been done since our last meeting. So really, it wasn't until last night that we heard that what we had done in the, I think it was the June 25th meeting, really, we didn't get any feedback on that until just last night. So there was almost that whole 2-week period of time. But we didn't sit still. I've contacted an appraiser. He suggested to me that 90 days is going to be tough. He said for a property of this kind of intricate conditions, you know, we have the BLM land patent. It's a pretty good sized place anyway. It's a unique property. He said that might be tough to do in 90 days, but he's not opposed to giving it a shot. I was able to make contact with a group of people that are working with NNDA, and they're just waiting for the ability to move onto the property and start an environmental study. And so they're lined up and ready to go. They're just waiting for the nod or the go-ahead. One of the other things, that I've got a list of folks, is to put together a committee of school and citizens to help determine the function of the, or at least to recommend or propose an idea back to the board as to what the property could become. So again, I think that's a decision that the board has to make, but certainly we could have a lot of that work done and then have it so that a presentation could be made to this body. I think in enough time. But still, you're right, 60 days is a short amount of time, and it would push us. Of course, people are also trying to take vacations and all those other minor things.
Richard?
I was just going to say, I'm concerned about the 25,000 non-refundable, particularly since we don't have, because from the information that we do have, there's a need for an environmental study. We have, what we're using it for involves students, and to me, if those inspections come back not favorable, then I don't see how we can go forward with the sale of this. At the same time, I don't think, it seems like it's a limited use property, so I'm not sure how many other schools or churches are lining up waiting for this, so I'm not in favor of having 25,000 non-refundable. There's too many things that in this period of time, a sale is not gonna go through.
And in addition to that, somebody must have read my mind, I heard it over here, but, it says we're allotting public funds. So I'm not comfortable necessarily doing that. Item 1, the increased sale price to cover the Realtors Commission. My understanding when we were talking about this before was we're not locked into a price right now anyway. I mean, I'm not against the asking price, but until we get an appraisal, I don't know that I want to commit to any fixed number yet. It might be that it's, the offer price should be less. And also, I'm sorry, I concur with the 60 days. I mean, doing environmental work ourselves in a firm, I know what it takes to get a lot of this done, and it's not, especially in today's climate, it's not unreasonable to need more time. So I think my feeling in general is we're in a pretty good position, and of course, it's up to the seller, what he wants to allow, but I don't think we're in a position to have to sacrifice too much. I mean, I really believe there isn't a lot of activity on that property, and we're I guess I'll leave it at that. I don't know that we have to compromise too much.
My concern would be that if the environmental assessment wasn't completed in 60 days and the sale went through, then we found out that there was some kind of problem, there could be quite a substantial investment on our part to correct it. Then I'm just not comfortable with these new terms.
Sorry,
So
Richard.
this isn't an action item. So how would we decide if we're going to put this on the special meeting or on next agendas, Mr. Pavlakis?
I believe that all of these comments that you're giving Mr. Stokes are very instructive for him so that he can go back to the seller through Mr. Uhart, inform him of the concerns, and depending on what the seller's reaction is to the discussion tonight, then Mr. Stokes may ask you for a special meeting or may say that there's no need for a special meeting and we can discuss it on the 23rd. So you're absolutely correct, no actions taken, but please keep your comments coming if you have them.
Do we have a real estate professional that we're using or speaking to, to get their input? I mean, this is their line of work.
We have been using Mr. John Uhart, and quite honestly, he has done really a fine job for us, and in fact, was instrumental in reducing the price that was asked in terms of the percentage of his commission. He's a community-minded guy. I can certainly check into that if you would like. I will tell you that according to Mr. Uhart, there is another church in the Reno area who has made a proposal on the property. That may or may not be an ending point. And I would also say with regard to the action that has already been taken, and I'll defer to Mr. Pavlakis here, but I believe you've already given me direction at our last board meeting. And so if you, and it sort of seems like what has been said here tonight is we're not comfortable with the new language. I could easily call Mr. Uhart in the morning and say, we're willing to counter-propose with our original proposal and just see what happens. I'm sure that they would wait until the 18th of July, and then if they said we don't agree, then of course it all starts over again or could go back to scratch.
Why, I guess I'm curious also, why has there been like this 2-week lull waiting for a response, I guess?
Trustee Walker, in the initial letter of intent, the deadline, the last day to respond was July 8th, which was yesterday. So they used the entire time, and that was how it
Don?
went.
Did you have something? Wait, I'm gonna go Don first and then Richard.
I guess, and I know we discussed a little bit last time, of the property, I mean, the $5,670,000 now they're talking, is this just, are we gonna own the property? I guess that's the question. So that's still unknown. All right.
I can tell you that the seller, through their attorneys, relayed a message to us through Mr. Uhart that they believed that the property, once transferred to the school district, if everything went to the end, and we ended up purchasing the property, that the property would be ours as long as it was used as a school into perpetuity. Now, I haven't seen any of that material, and so we would want to be able to verify that ourselves before we moved forward. But according to the seller, they felt that their legal team had strong evidence to show that that's available to us.
I would imagine this, I'm sorry.
I was just curious on the $25,000 that they went up front, so to speak. Can we even do that? Can we spend $25,000 like that?
I believe we could.
Now, Joe.
Well, and obviously though, Mr.
Yeah, I mean, two thoughts I had. One was, I appreciate the information we're getting from the owner and Mr. Uhart. I've worked with Mr. Uhart on other things, and he's certainly a reputable, outstanding member of the community. But I'd be more comfortable getting some objective advice if that was available to us. And go ahead. And I would think if we do, in whatever terms we go, if we decide to move forward, I would imagine there's some language we can put into the agreement that the final agreement is based on certainly the key factors of, is the property environmentally sound for our use? I mean, things like that for me are a go, no-go. I mean, the asking price and the 60 versus 90 days and whatnot are all negotiated terms, but we should have some language in there that says if we find this out during the escrow period or whatever, as long as it's legal to do so, that we have an out clause.
Mr. Pavlakis?
Thank you. What I'm getting as a result of tonight's meeting is that the board doesn't appear comfortable with these change terms. And with regard to the price, my recommendation, Mr. Stokes, would be that we could agree to the price, subject to the appraisal. And it's already in the document that the fee title to the property would be delivered to the school district at the closing. So if they can't give us good and clear title of the property, that we're not buying. According to our original offer, the entire $50,000 would be refundable. They're proposing that if we decide for any reason, whether the reason is good or bad, not to purchase, that they get to keep the $25,000. It sounds like that's not acceptable. And with regard to the time periods that we want to go back, it sounds like the answer is just no to these changes, and the discussion would be that the board's probably comfortable with the offer they originally made. The price is going to have to be something that would be approved at a subsequent meeting, and it's going to be subject to appraisal.
I was just going to say, with the $25,000 non-refundable, I would say that I'd be okay. I don't want it to be like for any reason, like we don't know what kind of school we're gonna put there. But I think the bigger picture with the environmental issues, that would be something where how could we word it where it's non-refundable unless the property doesn't meet, this certain thing, and then that would be a place, something that we could have it refunded.
And that's why I think we should put it on the agenda so we can get public comment, because like you guys, I feel very strange using public money for a non-refundable thing. I don't know how to tell, especially when we have a $3 million deficit in this budget. So I have a real hard time, but maybe that's just the way I feel. Maybe that's not the way that the public feels. So I think we should make the special meeting, or if you want to wait till the 23rd, except that our letter expires then. But I think it needs to be agendized and have it here on one of those days, and so that we can have the public discussion. Because even, no matter what we decide, we're still going to have a committee to tell with the public to figure out what exactly we're going to use it for at that point. I'm also real uncomfortable. And I think John Uhart is a great guy, great community guy, but it's like having somebody selling my house and I'm having the seller using their realtor and believing everything. So that would be something else that I'd like to look at.
And I'm sorry I didn't mention this earlier, but Uhart is identified in the document as the buyer's agent. As our agent. Right.
So is he?
That's why presumably they don't want to pay for it.
So is he representing both parties, or am I just assuming he's representing the seller?
I think it's an assumption that he's representing the seller because he wouldn't get a commission if there's no sale. But the document specifically, let me make sure. And it's in paragraph 7G, buyer and seller acknowledge that Uhart Commercial Real Estate Services represents the buyer. So,
Who is the
that's us.
property listed
I have
by?
two questions. So typically, isn't the seller who pays the commission on the realtors? I mean, when I bought my place, that's what happened. And then the other thing that I guess it doesn't sit well with me wanting, this is a reputable organization, the school district. So why would you want non-refundable $25,000? It's not like we're gonna go through all this effort and then just drop it at the last minute without cause. You know what I'm saying? For me, it just It leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
But as a buyer, and you're taking it off the market for 60 days, I can kind of see that because it's a business thing.
Oh.
Whether we find out something or not, so that
Compared to the
one's.
current use.
I think you have enough information from the board to go in a direction. Do you not, or do you have other questions?
I heard one individual say, I think we should come back for a second, or for a special meeting. And, but if we're coming back for a special meeting just to say, go with the original plan, I'm just not sure that's necessary. But if you want to discuss it further, I mean, there are,
No, that's fine.
There are
I
pieces here
misunderstood. It's after 9, so I get a little
yeah,
foggy.
well, this is important. I mean, this is something that could surely benefit the school district. And I just want to make sure we give it the due diligence that we need to and not overlook something.
Mrs. Stokes, can we go back with a counter proposal? I know this houses I've purchased, there's a back and forth negotiations. And could we go back with our original proposal and say this is what that we're comfortable with? And then let them turn it down? I don't know.
So I've already said what I think, so I better let Mr. Pavlakis talk.
I think our offer expired, and I think that their counter proposal will expire on the 18th. I'm not hearing any appetite to accept the counter offer, so in my mind, it seems kind of useless to have a special meeting to have the board say, we reject the counter offer, we want to make it a new offer, unless you want to do that. That's my impression. I mean, I don't, on the basis of what I heard tonight, I don't see the need for a special meeting. There may be events that develop as a result of your conversation with Mr. Uhart that would necessitate a special meeting. But at this point, I don't see it.
Madam President, I believe that does give me enough information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions with regard? Now, since we do have the time and the agenda does allow us to talk about other things, it may be a moot point, but I did put together some ideas about pros and cons for different uses. I received some feedback from Trustee Cassiopo about another potential use of the building, which is an early childhood center. We can certainly go into that, or maybe that is premature, given where we are right now with the property.
Since I brought it up, I'd be okay waiting. I wanted to just give you some other ideas and speak to, to experts within the school district on, is that viable, is that wanted?
Any other comments? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just thinking about it. So our offer expired. They didn't accept it because they gave us a counter offer. But we can't accept that offer in this meeting because we have for discussion only and it wasn't agenda sized. So we don't meet regularly again until their counter offer expires. So
Mr. Stokes will communicate all that tomorrow. And if he perceives that there's any movement on the part of the seller that would necessitate or mitigate towards asking for a special meeting, he will communicate with the board president, and she can decide whether to call a special meeting. But at this point, given what I've heard, I don't see the need for a special meeting to say no, unless I'm missing something.
Thank you, Mr. Stokes. Thank you, board. Moving on to number 20, approval of the consent agenda. And I do want you to note that 20D includes the part of that motion that was admitted. So I just wanted to let you know that that was taken care of in this. So looking for a motion.
I move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Mike, second by Laurel. Any public comment on this? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Informational items? Any questions or comments on those? Seeing none, moving on to 22, request for future agenda items. Time's up. Thank you very much. If you do, remember, you always have that. If you don't bring them up here, you can always call Mr. Stokes and bring it up with him, and we'll get it on an agenda.
Call you.
Or you can call me too, before 9 o'clock preferably. And 23, adjournment. Thank you very much. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks. And remember your homework assignments, August 1st. Because I will be meeting with Renee on August 2nd.
Like in our case, it's July
I know, but a lot of these people, they already have.
27th.